10 a.m. So we are going to get started. Welcome and thank you all for being here for our Transition IEP Parent Workshop. This webinar is brought to you by Fairfax County Public Schools Career and Transition Services. My name is Maggie Contreras, and I am a job coach supervisor with CTS, and I am pleased to host this virtual workshop with Sarah Blake, Sharon Denisar, and our expert panel. Today will consist of a lot of important information about the Transition IEP, and we hope that what you learned today is useful for you. So the purpose of today's workshop is to discuss the importance of the IEP for effective post-secondary planning during the secondary years, so middle and high school. We're going to talk about how to prepare students for successful post-school outcomes based on an effective transition plan. So you will learn all about how to craft that transition plan, how it's done in the school system, and how you as a parent can be a main contributor to that, along with your student, of course. We are going to describe the transition planning process and how the transition plan evolves as the student progresses through their academic career. And some of the questions that we'd like to answer for you today include: what should parents look for regarding the transition IEP? What questions should you as a parent ask the school team? And what questions should you ask your student about their transition plan? What role does the IEP play in increasing self-advocacy for students? And how do IEP goals support transition planning? Now, a little bit about today's format for this virtual workshop. We have about an hour presentation, followed by a live Q&A session with an expert panel of FCPS staff members who were listed on a previous slide. Please note that the panel will answer questions that we collected from many of you during the registration process. In addition to the panel, we will also have experts behind the scenes available to answer your questions via private chat, which we will show you in just a moment. So if additional questions come up, please feel free to use that process that we are about to show you, and we will be happy to assist you with your questions. Some important notes about today. We want to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded. Audio and camera for participants are turned off. We recommend using Google Chrome for optimal performance with BBCU. We do have some language interpreters serving some of our families today, so you may notice a slight pause after each slide, and that is to help facilitate the interpretation. Thank you to one of our interpreters who just reminded me to do that. Following today's workshop, you will receive an email with a link to today's recording, the presentation slides, and CTS contact information. We will also include a link to our workshop evaluation, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete that. As I mentioned previously, we are going to have private Q&A available for you behind the scenes. The way you are going to do this is you're going to start by raising your hand. So step one right here is to click the raise hand button. You will see that indicated that your hand is raised by this icon right here with the number 1 showing. Then you are going to go over to the right-hand corner, the lower right-hand corner, and hit this purple icon here to open the control panel. And then over here, you will be able to chat privately with a moderator. A moderator will see that your hand is raised, and they will be able to reach out to you, and then you can chat with them in the chat box. We also want to share that there is a zoom in feature that you can access on your screen in BBCU. It is shown here, and it looks like a little magnifying glass. in the upper left-hand corner. If you click on the icon, it will allow you to enlarge the presentation or zoom in and out if needed. We want to take a moment to point out our CTS public webpage, which is accessible through the FCPS website, and we encourage you to visit us on our website. Included, you will find an overview of all of our CTS programs and services. We have links for academic instruction, information about our career centers, our 18 to 22 programs, job coach services, ETR information, as well as general transition planning information and best practices. We also want to bring your attention to our transition toolkit for parents, which Ms. Blake has just put in the chat for you all. This is a comprehensive resource, and it's specifically designed for parents and families to become more familiar with the transition planning process, as well as our transition programs and services here in FCPS. Much of today's presentation is based around information included in the toolkit, so we want to make sure everyone has access. So if you want to follow electronically with that link, you can do that. And those of you who requested a hard copy, hopefully you have received that. And following the conclusion of the workshop, you will have another opportunity to request a hard copy when we send our follow-up email. So please don't hesitate to request that if you would like a hard copy to have for yourself. And with that, we are going to get started on the presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Blake. Take it away, Ms. Blake.
Hello, good morning. Sorry about that. I had some extra feedback going on. I'm Sarah Blake, Educational Specialist for Career and Transition Services. And we're going to dive right into the Transition IEP. So let's get started. Who's involved in transition planning? It's the family, principal designee, case manager, other school staff, which could include the ETR or school counselor, psychologist, social worker, and general education teacher as appropriate. We say as appropriate here because some students are enrolled in public day schools such as Quandra Road School, Cedar Lane School, Pulley or Davis Career Centers, and they might not have access to a general education teacher. And then also this, as the student gets ready to age out, there might even be an adult service provider representative at the IEP. But the most important participant is the student. The plan is all about them. So our job is to help students find answers to these questions. Who am I? Where am I going? How will I get there? And these questions become increasingly more important as the student reaches transition age. Through collaboration and IEP teams working together, we can help students answer these questions. I'm going to try to slow it down for you, Ms. Valencia, and the other interpreters. Sorry about that. And this slide is here to remind us that transition is a collaborative effort. Every member of the IEP team has responsibilities to help the students successfully transition towards their post-secondary goals. Right. IEP teams prepare students for productive lives by honoring the student's vision, using person-centered approach, and using data to develop a coordinated set of activities. When using a person-centered approach, we're not just talking about academics. When transition planning, we want to take a holistic, whole person approach. So when we discuss educational goals, we're talking about goals that are in addition to academics. We want to discuss essential skills like handling money, taking medication, hygiene, executive functioning, socializing, and self-advocacy skills. So always remember that when transition programming, it is a holistic and individualized process. Now, we put a link in chat to earlier for the Transition Toolkit for Parents. And again, want to follow along, we're on page 1. According to IDEA 2004, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act defines transition services as a coordinated set of activities that are result-oriented, based on students' needs, preferences, and interests, that include instruction-related services, community experiences, employment, and other post-school adult living objectives. The bottom line is that transition is critical in helping students prepare for life after graduation. All right, continuing on page 1 of the Transition Toolkit for Parents, we review the Virginia transition requirements based on IDEA 2004. So starting in grade 8 or age 14, every IEP includes the transition plan, and the IEP becomes a transition IEP and must include measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate assessments, transition services, including course of study needed to assist the student to reach the post-secondary goals, and consideration of the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. I also want to note that in FCPS, when individual circumstances dictate, transition planning can begin even earlier, such as if a student needs extensive support to manage medical or behavior concern. Transition planning may need to start as early as the elementary school years. We want to begin planning early so students have time to learn about themselves, their strengths, their skills, and they can begin making tentative career decisions. And while we're talking about age, I want to note that on the same page in your transition toolkit for parents, there's also information about age of majority. And in Virginia at age 18, all rights related to special education procedural safeguards transfer from the parent or guardian to the student. So at age 18, the parent or guardian will continue to be informed, but the student has decision-making authority unless the family obtains guardianship. I just want to note that there if your student is getting older and close to the age of 18. So what percentage of transition age students should participate in development of their transition plan and attend their IEP meeting? all of them. It's important that the student be involved in his or her transition planning and the entire IEP process. The law emphasizes student involvement in transition planning process, and participation needs to be documented. On page 303 of the IEP, there is a checkbox that documents student participation in transition planning. There's a screenshot of that checkbox here. And this is where the student initials and acknowledges that they have participated in drafting their transition plan, and that it includes all parts of their interests and preferences. And if you're following along in the Transition Toolkit for Parents, we're still on page 2, and it also lists many reasons why it is important for the student to be an active participant in the IEP process. Research shows that if a student holds some responsibility for determining and monitoring their goals, that they're just going to be more invested in their educational plan, and it builds self-awareness and self-advocacy, and we're going to cover that later on in our presentation. And for those of you who just joined, we have many interpreters here in the session today, and I'm slowing down to give them time to speak to other participants. So again, later in this presentation, we're going to talk about student involvement in the IEP project, but at a minimum, the transition plan should be based on the student's interests and preferences. And best practices are that we get the students involved to the most maximum extent possible. Now we're going to move on to transition assessment, and on page 3 of the Transition Toolkit for Parents, it states that transition planning should always begin with assessment. Assessment can help direct students to explore occupational areas such as working with data and people, things, or ideas. Transition assessment can help students conceptualize goals that they haven't even considered, and make them think about other careers that they haven't been exposed to yet. We will cover transition assessment in greater detail a little later, but for now, we want you to know that assessment information is important because it drives the development of the entire IEP goals and objectives. Here are screenshots of the transition plan, IEPs pages 303 and 304. If you're following along in the Transition Toolkit for Parents, we're on page 4 and 5. And if you just joined us and don't have a previous link to the Transition Toolkit, we're going to put that again in chat. So when you're in an IEP meeting, these pages are the front of the IEP. These pages begin with a discussion of anticipated graduation year and anticipated diploma. Up on the top box, the second box from the top. And then we move to a discussion of the student's post-secondary goals. And the entire contents of the IEP should be designed to equip the students to reach these post-secondary goals. So again, the pages I just showed you on the previous slide, transition page 303, include information on transition assessment. These assessments can help us determine students' interests, strengths, and career goals. Also on IEP pages 303, post-secondary goals are discussed, and this is what the student wants to do after he or she exits the public school system. So after they graduate or exit the public school system. And also on transition goal, page 303, it includes transition objectives. And these are benchmarks, and this is what the student is going to do this year to help achieve their career goal. So why is the transition plan so important? Because it drives the entire IEP. It is in the front of the IEP to drive the rest of it. Assessments help determine the student's interest, preferences, strengths, and post-secondary goals. The post-secondary goals of the transition plan are what the student wants to do after he or she exits the school system. And again, the objectives are benchmarks, what the student is going to do this year to help the student achieve these career goals. And then you can see as the arrows go down, the annual IEP goals with supporting objectives. Sometimes in the IEP, if you're looking at it, it's called area of need. All goals within the IEP should then focus on academic and functional skills that the student needs in order to move from school to post-secondary opportunities. So the transition plan should be driving the entire IEP. And this slide is here to remind us that transition planning is ongoing. When transition planning begins in 8th grade, a lot of goals may look vague. Transition goals may look vague. Career goals might begin with saying, I'm not really sure of my career goal, but through assessment, I know I want to work outdoors, or I want to have a career helping people. So when the students begin with a career goal, again, sometimes it looks vague. And sometimes when they begin transition planning, the goals may appear unrealistic. Some students might want to say, I want to be the next Taylor Swift, or I want to be a famous basketball player. But through thoughtful and coordinated planning over several years, our students can tighten up these goals and we can have viable, successful transition plans in place by the time they exit FCPS. So again, this slide is here to remind us that transition planning is a process, it's fluid, it's not an event, and that we fine-tune transition plan goals through the years. So after transition goals are discussed, the team moves from IEP page 303 to IEP page 304. And a screenshot of IEP page 304 is on the left-hand side of the slide. Here, the IEP team members check off transition services that support students' progress towards achieving their career goal. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot of pages 6 and 7 in the transition toolkit for parents. And these pages briefly explain transition services listed in the IEP. So employment and transition representative services are explained in the toolkit on the right-hand side as transition resource contact available at each high school to help with job seeking, job maintenance, and planning for the future. And on the right-hand side of the screen, it explains other courses that your student may be interested in participating in, such as work awareness and transition, and how it is an elective course that combines career exploration and introduces work experiences. So as you're in an IEP team meeting and they're checking off boxes, you can always refer to the transition toolkit to see what these boxes mean, such as academy support is explained. As your student chooses to, if your student chooses to attend an academy to take a career tech ed class, you'll want to know that Academy has a support team to help students with IEPs successfully complete course requirements. So each one of these checkboxes is explained in detail in the transition toolkit for parents. And here we zoomed into the service page just a little bit more, and you can see where the IE teams can select Explore and Select, and that transition services link to post-secondary goals. Again, these school services can be academic courses, elective classes, career tech ed academy classes. It can be work awareness and transition courses, education for employment for the office, special education career centers such as Davis and Pulley. And then as the student gets closer to graduation, the team will discuss post-school transition services. So the smaller box on the right. And this could include referrals to adult agencies such as DARS, Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, the CSB, Fairfax Falls Church Community Services Board, and the DBVI, Department for Blind and Visually Impaired, are a few. And on page 7 of the Transition Toolkit for Parents, it contains a brief description and explanation of the transition services offered in the county. And so now it's time for me to slide my voice out of the presentation and hand it over to Ms. Maggie Contreras, who's going to pick up the conversation with transition assessment.
Thank you, Ms. Blake, for all of that valuable information about the transition IEP. We're going to continue our discussion and talk in a little bit more detail about transition assessment, which Sarah mentioned earlier. Because transition assessment, it really plays a pivotal role in the transition planning process. The first step in developing a transition plan is to consider transition assessment. And you may be asking yourself, what exactly that is. That's a question that we often get. And really, in a nutshell, transition assessment is any information, we kind of look at it in 3 ways, that helps inform the team, including the student, when developing post-secondary goals. Information that helps identify needed areas that can be addressed in the IEP or areas of need, and information that helps with refining and improving the plan. So transition assessment, like transition plan, it's an ongoing process. It's not something that's just done in isolation, right before that IEP meeting. It's something that can be done throughout the year, throughout a student's journey. And transition assessment can be pulled from a variety of sources. It can come from existing data. So for example, reevaluation information, standardized assessments such as SOLs or ASVABs if a student's taken that, or formal career assessments, as well as new data. And that could be formal or informal. So other examples could be checklists, classroom assessments, interest inventories, things like that. But the transition assessment, it's the foundation for effective planning, and it provides a holistic picture of the individual student. And even for very young children, so like students in elementary school, it's important to begin considering their interests, their strengths, their preferences, and provide opportunities to increase career awareness, through experiences, and even to begin documenting them. And schools should seek parent input in regard to those areas, so their preferences, their interests, their strengths. And those can be documented in the IEP. Every IEP has the section called the present level of performance, or the plot page, and that's an easy place to document this type of information, even when a formal transition plan isn't yet included. And as the child gets older and into their secondary years, that information does become a formal part of the IEP with its own dedicated pages. So the IEP 303 and 304 that Sarah mentioned. And here are just some of the areas that are addressed by transition assessment. And members of the IEP team, they should be asking questions related to these areas that are relevant to the student, with transition assessment intended to answer these questions. I think it's important to note that when we talk about interests, that could include vocational and academic interests, but it could also be hobbies and other activities that the student enjoys. And we also want to collect information on things that the student does well. It doesn't have to be just grades or tests, but it could be home-related skills, functional skills, for example, like laundry, meal prep, and household tasks. Work-related skills such as following directions, time management, taking initiative, things like that. Those are also really important. And as your child moves towards secondary years, again, it is best practice that your feedback as a parent be sought in relation to these areas. And we'll talk about some ways that you can give your feedback using some of the information in the toolkit. So what you see here on the left side of the screen is an example of the transition assessment section in C-STARS to show what types of transition assessment were reviewed and used to get input in developing that transition plan. And these assessments that you see selected here, these are appropriate kinds of assessments that would be used for a student with a post-secondary education goal of college. So for example, we would want to be looking at grades and standardized assessments such as SOLs or even PSAT scores for a student that may be college bound. An interview with the student is also a very useful assessment tool to get good information regardless of, a student's post-secondary goal. We do want to point out that it is best practice to have at least 3 assessment areas that are reviewed and selected on the plan. And on the right side, you see some other examples of types of assessments that also provide useful information, especially for some students that may have a post-secondary goal of going directly to employment or enrolling in some kind of post-secondary training. So we have community work experience reports, which are used with students who have participated in community work experience through classes such as WAT or Education for Employment for the Office. We have job coach reports for students that have received those services. Formal career assessments, we have 2 career assessment centers here in FCPS staffed with vocational evaluators, and we have a variety of different assessment options for various levels of students. And we have many other informal assessment tools that relate to things like independent living, functional skills, self-determination, among others. So a good question then for parents to ask is how and why certain transition assessments were selected and how they impacted the development of the transition IEP. Continuing with our discussion, let's take a look at future planning. As educators, we want to involve families in the transition planning process. And parent input is important in all 3 stages of this planning process. So the toolkit explains in detail what each of these rules of transition planning involve. We do follow one of the best practices of transition planning, which is what we call backwards planning. And that really relates to the first rule, which is to be future oriented. We ask students to think beyond high school, to what they'd like to be doing in their mid-20s, for instance, and then go through all the steps they would have to take to get there, identifying any barriers or challenges they might encounter in their journey. And granted, this is difficult, especially for younger students and many older students as well. Quite frankly, it's hard for students to kind of see beyond what's today or even next week. You don't know what you don't know. And this is another reason why we start early and emphasize that this is a process that teaches goal setting and self-determination along the way for students if they're involved in this process. Which brings us to rule number 2, which is to start early and review at least annually. Transition planning should be a long-term process. It is implied by the language of the law, which requires the transition plan to start at age 14 or grade 8, whichever comes first, and to be updated annually. So for this reason, development of each transition IEP begins with a review of the previous year's transition plan. So that's the first thing we should be doing with a student when we sit down and draft that transition plan, is to look at last year's plan first to help guide the process and set the next IEP in motion. This is a graphic organizer to illustrate information that would be on page 303 that Ms. Blake showed us earlier from the toolkit for the backwards planning approach. And this can help a student understand over time whether their goals are viable or realistic. So those yearly transition objectives play a very important part in the process. So in this example that you see here, the transition objectives, again, what the student is going to do over the next year, so within the duration of that IEP, are to play on the varsity football team, pass SOLs, and maintain a GPA of 3.5. Those directly relate to the post-secondary goals, which are to attend a four-year college, work with professional trainers and coaches, and play professional sports, which relate to the career goal, to become a professional athlete. So this process illustrates the flow of IEP 303. If those yearly transition objectives are not met, then it may be necessary for the student and the rest of the IEP team to adjust the post-secondary goals and possibly the career goal. It's important to remember that the yearly transition objectives should have substance, they should be relevant, and they should be written as benchmarks. And that way the viability of the career goal and the post-secondary goal will be taken into consideration and inform the team whether revision of the post-secondary plans is necessary. And this is just another example demonstrating the backwards planning process. So in this example, the career goal is I want to work with my hands, probably as an electrician. And the transition objectives, again, the things the student is going to do presently to work towards those post-secondary goals are to visit the residential construction site to learn about the class, apply to take electrician 2 academy class, research apprenticeship opportunities, and obtain a driver's license. And the post-secondary goals, of course, support that career goal. So after having a future focus, using the backwards planning approach and reviewing last year's transition plan, we're now at the revised stage, which is to fine-tune the transition plan over the years in school until the student graduates or exits from FCPS. So we just want to mention some tips and suggestions to help in guiding your student through the transition planning process. Discuss interests and preferences. Help your child provide that information to the IEP team or their teacher, their ETR, or their case manager. And ensure that this information is recorded in the IEP, even before the transition plan is initiated. And we mentioned that a good place to do this is in the plot page. In your toolkit, there are some helpful timelines for suggested activities starting in middle school. So that's on page 12 of your toolkit, and continuing through 9th, 10th, and onward through 12th grade or age 22. So that's pages 12 to 14. There's also a charting your future activity for middle school and high school. And that is a simple but effective tool for just beginning to think about that backwards planning process. And that is on page 15 and 16 of the toolkit. There's also a transition planning checklist for students and parents on page 17. And that is an easy way to give input as a parent for the transition plan. If you do not receive that from your school, don't hesitate to provide that document to your child's case manager. And then lastly, on pages 18 through 24 of the toolkit, there are suggested transition activities to use as yearly objectives related to career, self-advocacy, and independent living for both low incidence and high incidence disabilities. And this is provided so that you and your student can provide input into those areas that could be included in the IEP. So we want to take this opportunity to share an update regarding the educational and career planning portfolio. So starting on page 26 of your toolkit, there is an example that you'll see there of the career portfolio. And there's a little bit of background. The career portfolio is initiated when a student reaches transition age 14, and it's used for storing transition assessments and transition related documents and information. And it's a way to help track transition planning and helps to ensure the continuity of planning from year to year. And we are pleased to inform you that the career portfolios have moved online in Naviance Student, and we're going to show you how to access your student's electronic career portfolio. So what you're going to do is you just have to navigate to fcps.edu/Naviance. Then you would scroll down to parents or guardians, and then click on parent or guardian Naviance login. And then it will take you to the FCPS login screen that I'm sure you're all familiar with. You would log into Parent View. This is the same login for SIS, Blackboard. And once you enter your information, it'll bring you to the Naviance page. At the bottom, you make sure you click on your student's name. Not click on the actual Naviance icon. You click on your student's name. And you will be brought to your student's homepage. At the top of the page, you're going to go to the drop-down menu that says About Me. Then you're going to click on Students Stuff. It'll have your student's name. And then Documents Shared with Me. You're going to click on, once you are brought to the next page, click on Career and Transition Services. You could also click View. You click on Career and Transition Services, and then a list will come up of the documents that are included in your student's career portfolio. If you click on one of the documents and you want to view it, you must, in this endpoint security box pops up, you must click Continue. Otherwise, the document will be blank. It'll be down here. So once you click Continue, document will open in a new tab. Here is an example of a transition assessment. This is a formal career assessment report that was uploaded and will stay in the student's electronic portfolio, and students and parents will be able to access this anytime. We do want to point out that this is a new initiative, so if you happen to check your student's folder and you don't see any documents in there yet, please don't be alarmed. You can always feel free to reach out to your student's case manager or ETR if you have questions. And just one more piece of information about information in your toolkit. On page 33, we want to share that there are transition resources and information related to turning 18, the age of majority that Ms. Blake mentioned earlier, FCPS career instruction, such as course offerings and other services, community and post-secondary resources, such as adult services, and a myriad of transition web resources divided into specific categories. Next, we have Ms. Dennis R., who's going to talk more about self-determination and the student voice in this process. So I am going to turn it over to her.
Thank you, Mrs. Contreras. I appreciate it. Now that we've learned about the transition plan and the transition planning process, let's discuss the student's role in the IEP process. As you know, the IEP stands for the Individualized Education Plan, and we can't forget that very important I, the student. The law requires students to be a part of the IEP process. When we say be a part of, we don't mean that the student just be in attendance and be a silent member of the IEP meeting. We want and expect students to have a voice during their IEP meeting and participate in the preparation and implementation of their document. As you know, students start attending their IEP meetings at the age of 14, and consequently, they need an explanation as to what the IEP is and why they have an IEP in order for this process to be a meaningful one. This conversation should be facilitated by parents and school staff working together. This conversation is not just a one-time discussion. A great time to discuss the student's IEP with them is at the start of every school year or even at the start of every grading period. Let's look at a video clip where we can see a teacher preparing a student to take an active role in her IEP meeting. Okay, Sarah.
All right, Sydney, we're going to start working on picking your pictures for your presentation today. Let's start with your first slide. I want Sydney to be as involved as possible in creating her PowerPoint for her presentation at her IEP. In the past, the students in our class have not been involved at all in the IEP process. So this was a way to bring Sydney in and to get her involved in the making of the presentation, and then also for her to be involved later in the actual presenting of her PowerPoint. Okay, now that we've talked a lot about Sydney's strengths, we're going to talk a little bit about the places that Sydney has challenges with. It's the best IEP meeting I have ever been a part of. This is my 8th year teaching. Just having a celebration of the student and having the student involved was the most wonderful. It's all about the student, and that's what it should be.
When the student presents at their IEP meeting, it sets, oops, hold on one moment. There we go. Thank you, Sarah. When the student presents at their IEP meeting, it sets an amazing positive tone for the entire meeting. Teachers, parents, and the student loves it. The student is filled with pride. The teacher is just so excited, and the family is just also filled with pride. And it really is just a wonderful way for the group to work together. Here's another example of a student stating his needs and wants during an IEP meeting, but he's doing it in a creative and comfortable way for him. There are so many ways for students to participate in their transition plan and their IEP, and it should be based on the student's comfort level. Here is an example of a student who doesn't want to communicate during their IEP meeting, but is taking an active role in the development of his IEP. Students can work with their teachers and their IEP prior to their meeting and practice how they're going to participate in order to make them feel more at ease. Okay, Sarah. Thank you. We'll be getting back to our presentation in a moment. So we want to make sure that we honor each of our students and we know their comfort levels and not to push them too hard. But we want to make sure that we hear them and hear their voices and hear their needs and their wants. And that video clip was a wonderful way to hear what this student wanted and what he needs without kind of pushing him too far. Self-determination is an important term for us to know. Self-determination is knowing and believing in yourself, taking ownership of your learning, knowing about your strengths and weaknesses, knowing what accommodations you need and why, knowing what you want your future to be and how you make plans to achieve it, and knowing what supports you need to take control of your life. Let's look at some research about self-determination. Research from the past 2 decades suggests that students who have strong self-determination skills and are involved in their own IEP development, goal setting, and planning are more likely to achieve their goals, improve their academic skills, develop important self-advocacy skills and communication skills, graduate from high school, gain better employment and quality of life as adults. As a result of this research, we know kids have to exit high school with strong self-determination skills. So how do we develop self-determination skills within our students? The Virginia Department of Education created an amazing program called Determined. And Determined was developed for students with disabilities because they recognized that our students lacked the self-determination skills once they exited the school system. This program is meant to be used at home and at school to help kids become self-determined individuals. This is what the Determined website looks like. And it's full of resources and videos for students to learn how to become self-determined individuals in school and in life. And you know what? The website is listed below, and I think it was cut off. So I'm going to let me just tell you, and I apologize, the website is imdetermined.org. It's www.imdetermined, that's one word, .org. That's www.imdetermined.org. And the home page, you can see it has links, educator links at the top, parent tab, teacher tab, student tab, and there are so many wonderful resources within each tab. So please, when you go to the website, please explore each tab. You'll find so many wonderful resources and materials. In addition to the website and resources, there are wonderful state events, such as the very popular Determined Youth Summit, which is held at James Madison University, where kids with disabilities come together and make new friends, share their home and school experiences related to their disabilities, as well as complete self-determination activities as a group. This is a supportive and inspirational experience for students. And there are many wonderful videos on this site where you see students using the materials developed by the state.
All right, so we're just going to share with you a few resources from the I Am Determined state website. The first one is called a one-pager, and it can be done at school or at home, which will help the student get to know themselves. Once the student has completed this form, they can then present it at the to the IEP team, which is a great way to start the IEP meeting. Another way to use this document is to present this to the teachers at the beginning of the year so that teachers can get to know the students quickly. Can you turn the slide? Our ultimate goal is that the student will take ownership of their IEP and will lead their IEP meeting, which you saw in the beginning of this presentation. We had the video clip. And in the I Am Determined curriculum, there are plenty of suggestions for students to do this. One of our favorite tools from the I Am Determined website is the student involvement brochure. This document is a simple guide and can be used to help students understand the importance of their participation in the IEP. And it provides an outline and a checklist for students to use so that they're more comfortable in the process. And on page 2 of the same guide, there are suggestions for ways students can participate in their IEP, before the IEP, sending invitations, during the IEP, stating their interests and their strengths during the meeting. And some students may be comfortable leading their own meeting and having a voice. We always want to meet the students at their comfort level. But this brochure is just a simple guide to help students participate in the process. Again, there's details for what the student can do before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. All right, sorry again about the technical difficulties, and we're trying to slow down for the interpreters. But this includes the training portion of today's workshop. I'd like to thank Ms. Contreras and Ms. Denisar for sharing their assessment information, backwards planning, and the I Am Determined resources in Fairfax County Public Schools that are implemented in Fairfax County Public Schools. It's very much appreciated. And we're going to be moving on to the panel presentation in a minute. And now I'd just like to summarize a little bit about what we mentioned today. Your student must be invited to the IEP team meeting. Your student should have active participation in the IEP process. Planning should be based on age-appropriate transition assessments. The career goal is identified based on interests, preferences, strengths, and capabilities. And we must have a defined, measurable post-secondary career goal in the transition plan to drive the IEP. In transition objectives, we really want to focus on what the student's going to do this year as a benchmark for their career goals, so we can tighten up those career goals over time. All right. Next, I would like to welcome our panel members to our workshop. But before I introduce them, I want to thank you all for submitting your transition questions prior to today's presentation. And please know that we received many transition questions, and unfortunately, there's just not enough time for us during a 2-hour workshop to answer all of your questions. But we combined as many questions as we could, and we hope that your question does get answered today. And in the previous presentation that we just concluded, hopefully some of your answers were, some of your questions were answered there too. So I'd like to remind you that while your mics are off, and you can still at any point raise your hand, have a private conversation with one of our expert transition experts in chat, or you can just type in chat your questions and we'll try to get those answered for you. And if any of your questions are left unanswered after today's workshop, please know that you can reach out to your employment and transition representative at your child's high school or the feeder school in your neighborhood, And we'll be emailing you contact information for CTS staff, which includes the Employment and Transition Representative after this workshop. We'll send you the slides, the recording, and contact information for all of us. And now I'd like to introduce the panel. Our host is Judy Lieberman, Assistive Technology Services for Career and Transition Services. And Ms. Lieberman, we will ask the panel your list of questions. We also have Jackie Prendergast on the panel. Ms. Prendergast is a procedural support liaison at South Lakes High School. And joining us are two employment and transition representatives. Whitney Bailey is an ETR at West Potomac High School, and Becky Cousins is an ETR from West Springfield High School. Thank you everyone for being here this morning. Ms. Lieberman, I'm gonna let you take it away, and if you could pause briefly between questions so all of our interpreters have time to share information with participants.
All right, so our first question sent in is, what are available opportunities for students aged 18 to 22?
Hi everyone, my name is Whitney Bailey. I'm going to take this question. So there are a variety of options for students 18 to 22. And just to clarify, students who do not receive a standard diploma and are still receiving special education services are able to stay in Fairfax County Public Schools until age 22. So students might want to take advantage of our special education career centers, which are the Pulley Center for one part of the county and the Davis Center for the other part of the county. The STEP program also is located throughout the county at different high schools. Depending on where your base school is, that would determine which STEP program you attend. Just a quick overview, the Special Education Career Centers, Pulley and Davis, are working with students during the day on goals that will help them to move forward with supported employment. So these are students that will likely need some sort of supports with employment as they move forward after they leave public schools. The STEP program is more geared toward students who are going toward competitive employment. However, these programs can be fluid. There are students who go from the Pulley program to the STEP program, and there are students who go from the STEP program to the Pulley program, just based on what students need. Also, another option is that some students want to hold back a class to put off that achievement of the standard diplomas to stay in Fairfax County Public Schools to take advantage of more academy class time. And this would be, for instance, a student was in Pharmacy Tech 1 and was in their senior year and decided to hold back a graduation requirement so that they could have a 5th year in high school and complete that Pharmacy Tech class requirement and certification. Outside of the public schools, we have 2 federally funded programs that disability is a qualifying criteria. So you might, when you look up Job Corps and Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, you might see that there's a financial requirement. But what they're going to look at your student as far as finances go is they're going to look at them at age 18, what their financial situation is, and typically they're qualified, and disability is also a qualifying factor. And those are, again, free opportunities to get job training, careers and industry certifications in high need areas. Again, government federally funded programs. I get very excited about Job Corps and WIOA because I tell students it's money in your pocket. It's you're actually you're getting certifications that, you know, if I wanted to go get a certification in, let's say, my HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning certification. Sorry, I think I'm going too fast. I'm going to slow down. Um, Also so these classes are available to students, and I can, or whoever your ETR is, can help to connect you to those programs that are in the community. And also the adult career education classes in Fairfax County, which are available to all adults who live in Fairfax County, including students after they graduate once they're 18. Those classes, though, will be oftentimes similar opportunities to what the academies can provide. However, they are for cost. So it depends on the course as far as what the cost is, but they're usually between right around $1,200 to $1,500 per course. Okay, that's about it for my question. Judy, do you want to pose the next question, or do we wait for interpretation?
I'm just giving a moment for the interpreters to catch up, and then I will share the next question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you so much, Whitney. Here is another question that came in. I know an IEP meeting is once a year, but what if there are changes with our child? Can we ask for another meeting at another point?
Hi, this is Jackie, and I'd like to jump in with this question. Yes, IEP teams can reconvene at any time. This can be a parent request, or the school can request a meeting. I would recommend anytime there's any changes, or the IEP team or the family feels that goals need to be updated, revised, or services need to be reconsidered, that the team comes back. And as I said, this can either be the family can ask for this, or the school team can ask for this.
Thank you, Jackie. Another question is there a checklist that we can follow to make sure we are addressing everything at the right time?
Hi, yes, there's several places to find checklists. The first one that I would recommend is the transition toolkit that they've referenced throughout this presentation. If you actually go to page 11 of the transition toolkit, they have a list of timelines starting, I believe, in 7th grade through 12th grade. So again, that's page 11 of the transition toolkit that they referenced. There's another place that I kind of find checklists, and that is if you have students that are college bound, College Board puts out checklists as well for each year, you know, 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders. So I'll go ahead and put in the chat a link for College Board and an example of one of their checklists. If you just search under College Board, they will come up. And another good place is to be talking with ETRs and asking your employment and transition representatives at your school for information about what should be the next steps. Okay, I'm finished answering that question.
Thank you, Becky. I'm just going to pause a second for the translators. Here's another question. My child was just diagnosed with ASD, and many behaviors we see are at home, but not sure if they are at school. How can anecdotals from home help us in the IEP process?
Hi, this is Jackie, and I can jump in with this question. I would recommend that if any time your child receives a new diagnosis, or you have new evaluations or just new information to share, that you do share that with your school team. If it is possible, the team may actually want to look at another area of eligibility, or go to the IEP and look to see if there's any needs, new needs that your child has that aren't being currently addressed. This would also be an opportunity to discuss those behaviors that you're seeing at home and how it's impacting your student. The IEP team members could share, the school team members could kind of share, are they seeing those behaviors as well? And if not, is that something that they need to monitor? Coming together again, as I said, as an IEP team would also give the team the ability to offer you suggestions. And those could be suggestions within our building. We do have behavior intervention teachers that can assist, or they may be able to put you in contact with resources in the community.
Thank you, Jackie. Here's another great question sent in by a parent. What type of supports or checklists can she use to assist in her IEP meeting?
Hi, everyone. This is Whitney Bailey again. I'll take this question. So as Sharon shared in the previous presentation on the I'm Determined initiative by the Virginia Department of Ed, there is a checklist for preparing students for their IEPs. And I've found it to be quite a helpful tool. Some students might like to use note cards. I think it really depends on the individual. And you can also check with the case manager and talk to the case manager about having your student lead his or her IEP, which can be a really powerful opportunity to, and it really makes the IEP student-centered. I've had great experiences with students leading their own IEPs, and it doesn't mean that the student has to conduct the entire IEP. They might just lead portions of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. When transitioning to high school during COVID, are there any differences for the transition IEP that will need to be adjusted once he or she is back?
Hi, this is Jackie. This is a great question. Yes, it is possible to make changes when we transition back to in-person. I would suspect that many students have had may have had changes due to the fact that we have been in person and virtual, and hopefully again we'll be transitioning again back to in person. Because of this, I would suspect that many students may have new needs or new concerns that they didn't have maybe prior to the closure. So I would recommend, again, contacting your IEP team, contacting your case manager or your department chair, and requesting an IEP meeting so that the team can reconvene and update with any new information or make any needed changes.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Here's another question. Since my daughter's interests are often focused on her current obsessions, how do I make sure the transition plan is realistic and obtainable?
This is Jackie. Again, my recommendation would be is to collaborate with your IEP team. Reach out to your case manager, discuss your concerns so that they can be addressed. What I think would be really important in these situations is looking for, and I know we've discussed this in the presentation, but can we find any overarching strengths or interests that could maybe be a basis for the transition plan?
Thank you again, Jackie. Is there an IEP in college?
Hi, this is Whitney. So no, short answer, there is not an IEP in college. However, students who have disabilities may be eligible for accommodations in college. And I like to make that differentiation with students so that they understand that when they are in public school, they are entitled to accommodations. When they leave high school and they move on to college or career training, they may be eligible for accommodations, but they have to apply for accommodations through the Office of Disability Services. And every college has a Disability Services Center. However, different colleges will offer different levels of support. So it's really up to the individual university or training program, certification program, and you can work with your ETR to apply for these services, and you and your student will need to provide documentation of the disability, and typically all of those documents to support evidence of a disability can be found in your student's special education folder. There are some specialized programs that are fee-based, and there are 2 colleges that we know of right now that serve exclusively students with specific learning disabilities, and those are Landmark College and Beacon College. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. After the IEP meeting, how should my child best discuss her new goals with her teacher so she can make sure that she gets what she needs in class?
I'll take this question. So this is a really great opportunity to use self-advocacy. And it's going to depend on the specific student, how the student would like to share new goals with her teacher. I will say it is not the student's responsibility. It is the teacher's responsibility to be familiar with the current IEP, but in utilizing those self-advocacy skills, we're really helping to prepare students for life after high school. And just like I said in the previous question, when they head on to college or to whatever's next, there won't be there won't be a special education file that's waiting for them. They will have to decide whether or not to disclose their disability. And that's something I talk a lot with my students about is just when to disclose a disability and when not to. And so I would advise that it would be a good tool to use some of the I'm Determined resources to share needs, or it might just be a good idea for the student, with the help of and support of maybe the case manager, to schedule some individual meetings with his or her teachers to make sure that they're familiar with the IEP document and how they can be best supported. Because as we've said many times throughout this presentation and previous presentations, the student is the most important part of the IEP. Thank you.
Thank you, Whitney. What school resources are available to help my son figure out what career he is interested in? And if there are any work programs or internships, he can see what it's like to work in that field.
Okay, I'll take that question. You're going to laugh. I'm laughing. The thing that I recommend the most, the first thing is make sure that you are reading your emails from your college and career center specialists and your ETRs. A lot of information comes out, and there are internships and different career opportunities that are sent out, but a lot of people miss them because they're not reading their emails. The reason I'm laughing is because I will often ask families or students if they've received an email that I sent, and they say, yes, I received it. And I follow it up and I say, but did you read it? And they go, no, I didn't read it. So there's a lot of different internships. Like, for example, there's one called Genesis Works. Most families would find out about that by reading the College and Career Center Specialist emails for an information session on a program like that. So that's the next thing that I would recommend you do is start attending as many information sessions as you can, because each program has different, areas, and it might be appropriate for your child or it might not. The other thing that you can do is there are interest inventories. The school tends to give an interest inventory. There's different variations of it. There's one that all students typically take through Naviance Student. It's 180 questions. It's called the Career Interest Profiler. But there's also ones that you can just do online yourself, such as at mynextmove.org or Career One Stop. And those are a set of questions that will help students figure out maybe what career cluster they're interested in. And if you have students that need picture level support to take an interest inventory, there are interest inventories at that level as well. There are several career and transition classes that students can take. All the way up from academy classes like auto tech, intro to nursing, all the way, there's a range. There's also a class called Education for Employment that is not offered at every high school, but they will sometimes do an internship on, they call them non-paid community work experiences as part of the class. And there's another class called WAT, Work, Awareness, and Transition. The WAT and EFE classes are special education classes, and the whole purpose is to learn work skills needed for after high school. And if we weren't under quarantine, those classes typically would send, especially the WAT class would send students out to a non-paid community work experience, or a job site as we sometimes call them. There's another class called Education for Employment for the Office that is also a special education class, but it's a little bit different in that it's only offered at certain high schools, so students are bused to nearby high schools are bused to an EFEO class. Finally, there are, Maggie talked about this before, but there are several career assessments that ETRs can refer students for. This year, it's a little different because of COVID. There's one called a virtual career exploration experience. We have online career scopes. We have career snapshots. If we weren't under quarantine, there's a comprehensive career assessment that is sometimes given to students, and they go to the Mount Vernon or I forget the name of the other one. There's two assessment centers in the county, and they would go and Woodson, and they would go and get more hands-on assessment, but not every student needs that level of assessment. So it's really an IEP team decision for some of those more in-depth assessments to kind of see which students might need those.
Thank you, Becky. What are the differences between ADA and IDEA?
I'll take this question. So IDEA stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that is a law that covers students when they are in school, up to, if they don't achieve a standard diploma, up through their age 22. And as I said before, when students are in school and have an IEP up until age 22, they are entitled to their accommodations and they are entitled to have an IEP. When they leave school and move on to adulthood, whether that's post 18 or somewhere in between or after 22, the law that covers people with disabilities is referred to as the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that is a law that covers any American who has a disability and is an adult, and it offers accommodations. So these might be accommodations in educational settings, or they might be accommodations in the workplace. Like I said before, ADA requires that an individual disclose the disability to receive accommodations. And like I said before, there's no IEP in college. And so it's really important for students to understand the language around the laws, and that once they leave school and move on to college or training, that they will. And I like to remind students that after you leave school, there's not going to be, because they're entitled to their accommodations and to their IEPs, and it's the teacher's professional obligation to know and be familiar with that document. It can be quite a change to, after they leave high school, to understand that others are not obligated to know their needs, and it is their responsibility and their decision whether or not they disclose that disability. Okay, thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Whitney. I am wondering about employment opportunities in the time of COVID.
Okay, I'll take this question. One of the things with employment opportunities in the time of COVID is to think about how willing people are, to have their student out there, working part-time. I have students currently that are working part-time after school jobs. Their families are okay with them working in a supermarket or in a restaurant. And so those opportunities do exist. I have found, anecdotally, students that are looking for those kind of jobs are having a little bit harder of a time finding them than they have in past years. And I think it's because those positions are being filled by other workers right now. But there are employment opportunities, for part-time after-school employment. If you're not comfortable with that, there's also volunteer opportunities. There are several outdoor volunteer opportunities, with stream cleanups and that kind of thing. And there's also volunteer opportunities where you do stuff in, virtually or in the house where you're supporting others. So those are the ones that I'm thinking about. the most. If you have a student who is graduating and is looking for, full-time employment opportunities, Career One Stop has developed a part of their website specifically for what career fields are looking for employees during COVID, during this quarantine time. So again, I really like that Career One Stop website. There's a lot of information there, but that is where I would start. Okay.
Thank you, Becky. How do I avoid overstepping my child's self-determination skills, but still help her to get the most that she needs?
I'll take this one. I love this question. This makes me happy to hear because it is so important that we make the IEP process student-centered. And I think one of the most important things to do is to, especially in the IEP meetings and meetings in and around your child, to make it a habit to speak to your child when posing questions, not kind of talk around the child. I noticed this happen quite a bit at IEPs where the student will be sitting there and a parent will ask somebody at the table a question about their child without kind of including the child in the question and in the response to the question. I was with a family recently doing a intake for DARS, which is the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services, and it provides supports for individuals with disabilities to help them obtain and maintain employment. And the parents were really surprised after the meeting that the DARS counselor only posed the questions to the student. And they were actually quite pleasantly surprised at how much the student spoke up for herself and how articulate she was when given the opportunity to do so. So I think it's really important that we, and I know for myself as a parent, it can be difficult to not give my voice or my opinion of what I think should happen for my children, but it's really important to give the children a voice, give the students a voice, give the young adults a place to share and feel confident that they are being heard. Thanks, Judy.
That was a great answer, Whitney. Excellent, thank you. How do I know that we are not asking too much from the IEP team in support of our child?
This is Jackie, and this kind of ties in with the last question as well. My recommendation would be, as I said, continue to collaborate with your IEP team. Part of the discussion that takes place at IEP meetings is considering different supports and services. As a parent and as a part of that IEP team, it is completely appropriate to have that discussion or why or why not a particular service may be appropriate for your child. In IEP meetings, we also discuss the least restrictive environment, and we consider the impact. Anytime we are removing a child from general education, we do discuss what is the impact of that. And again, we're always looking at our goals. We want to make sure that our goals are always rigorous and that we are pushing our students, but that also that our IEP goals are also attainable.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Are there alumni of FCPS we could hear from about their application process and college experiences?
Hi, yep, this is Becky. I agree, this is a great way to hear from people who have been through this. I have attended Northern Virginia Community College has a program or a workshop typically in April called Nova Vision. It's put on by the Disability Support Services office at Nova, and they often will have a student panel of current Nova students to talk about the process. Individual schools will have student panels to talk about their experiences with college as well. Again, that information would come from the College and Career Center specialists. Career and Transition Services is putting together a super transition virtual week. I believe at the end of February, information will be coming out soon. And they're hoping to have a post-secondary education panel on there as well. Again, I think this is a great question because I think that people that have gone through it are good resources.
Thank you, Becky. Will staff at my high school help us with summer jobs and internships?
Okay, I'll take this question as well. Yes and no. The reason I say that is because we will share information and we will encourage students and families to follow through, but the school in general does not find internships. We share information about internships and then it's up to the student and the family to follow through on that. The first place, again, I'm going to keep saying this, make sure you are reading your College and Career Center specialist notices, emails. If you don't know who your College and Career Center specialist is, reach out to the school or look on a website or ask us. We can find you their name. But you're going to want to make sure that you're getting their emails and reading them. Additionally, as I said before, ETRs will send out information about different summer jobs, internships, that kind of thing. So you're going to want to be checking those out. In the past, there's a teen job fair. The teen job fair was offered, throughout the county for anybody who wanted to attend. I don't know if they will do a virtual one this year. And then another place where people have found employment over the summer is there's actually a Fairfax County Public Schools is actually building a house. It's called a residential construction site. And they, in the past, have paid students $8 an hour to come and do it. The hours of that program or that opportunity is 6 a.m. I think to 1 or 2 p.m. And so I've had many students who were interested and then listened to those hours and said maybe not. So I would say this, if you're looking for summer jobs, if students are looking for summer jobs now, a lot of the parks and recreation or lifeguarding and that kind of place, they actually kind of start in January, February. So it's okay to start looking for some of those opportunities, at Parks and Rec, Fairfax County Parks and Rec. If you're just looking, for a summer job, for example, at a grocery store or a restaurant or a retail store, my recommendation would be to start looking for those jobs. April, beginning of May, college students start returning and looking for jobs, so you kind of want to get ahead of that if you can. So the staff who are available to help would be, ETRs, the College and Career Center specialists. Sometimes counselors will know information, but it's definitely up to the families to follow and the students themselves to follow through with that.
Thank you, Becky. All right. How will outgoing middle school and high school IEPs share notes, ideas, strategies to make a smooth transition? Should the transition plan outline proposed schedules and electives?
That's a great question. I think Jackie was going to answer that question.
Is there anyone on the panel that would like to address this?
I'm happy to address it.
Thanks.
I'll tell you in my experience. So what often happens is the department chair or a member from the special education team from the high school will actually attend students' middle school's IEP, and they refer to it sometimes as a transition IEP, but they mean the transition from middle school to high school. So in my previous job to this one, used to do stuff like that. I would go, I would participate in those kind of IEPs. And what I typically would make sure would happen would be that the plot page of the IEP spelled out some of the most important things. I often tell new teachers that I'm working with, and I recommend this to actually you as families, to think, especially during the transition year, to think of the plot page, the present level of performance page, the notes page of the IEP as a letter to your child's new teacher. Not a letter, but you want to share the most important information that you want that next person to know. That it's not a place for very, very detailed, down to the minute kind of things, but enough to make them go, I need to follow up on this based on what I'm reading on the present level of performance page on the IEP. The transition plan should outline proposed schedules and electives. So the IEP is a special education document. So we will sometimes put on the plot page information about special education classes, generally, like whether or not the team recommends small group English or team taught English. But it is not a place where you can spell out that your child will definitely take guitar level 2. Those are general education electives, and the school counselors are responsible for those. The IEP can include special education electives. For example, the class that I mentioned before, work awareness and transition, that would be on the IEP. Even because it is, those have special education hours attached to them. And then in general, like I said, at least at the schools that I have worked at in the past, and I've worked at a few, the teams do work very hard between the middle and the high school to share information. Teachers will share it, talk to each other, because we all really want the transition to be successful. If I have received from parents before a one-pager about their kid. I usually get those not from students that are already in an FCPS school, but maybe the parents are military and they've come from somewhere else. And it's a one-pager, and it kind of explains it. And I'm talking about students with more significant disabilities that maybe have trouble communicating some of this themselves. And I have found those one-pagers to be very helpful as well. So certainly you could draft something letting, the staff know what kind of reinforcers work, what your child likes, doesn't like, if that makes you more comfortable. Okay?
Thank you so much, Becky. If I chose to get support from an advocate, will I be treated differently from the IEP meeting?
Okay. Jackie, would you like me to take this question? All right, I'm going to go ahead and take it then. So if I choose to get support from an advocate, will you be treated differently at an IEP meeting? No, you should not be treated differently at an IEP meeting. What you will have to do is sign a piece of paper giving permission for the advocate to be there. Can't remember the title of the form, but there is a form that basically gives permission because you have someone from outside of, not a parent, and outside of FCPS attending the meeting. Okay?
Thank you so much, Becky, for jumping in. And I believe that concludes the questions for the panel experts. Thank you so much for your expertise.
Yes, thank you. As we end the Q&A portion of today's workshop, I want to thank the panel for being here today, your willingness to take time out of your busy schedule and share your expertise. It's just very much appreciated to have experts in the field answer our questions. To everyone in the audience, I want to apologize if we did not get to your question. It's not too late to type your question into chat and or raise your hand and have a private conversation with one of our transition experts. And remember, you can always reach out to your employment and transition representative at your student's high school or the feeder school in your neighborhood. Before you go, I'd like to share some Career and Transition Services events with you. Since we received a few dozen questions specifically focusing on college, we want to let you know that earlier this school year, CTS hosted events that highlighted topics that students with disabilities might need to consider regarding college. And when we send you this presentation, you'll be able to click on these hyperlinks and listen to these recordings. I also want to let you know that next month we are hosting an event that we are changing to Super Transition Week, not just Super Transition Saturday. And this event is targeted for elementary and middle school parents and students, special ed students, to learn more about career and transition services and what's available for life in high school and how to prepare for life after high school. So we'll be sending you information on that. The next event I wanted to highlight that we're going to be having is something that Becky Cousins mentioned during our Q&A panel. We are hosting an event at NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College, called NOVA 2021 Vision. And it's a virtual conference for students interested in attending Northern Virginia Community College. And this conference will include presentations from disability support services and counseling services, and there's going to be a mock NOVA classroom for students to experience. And then there's also going to be a current student panel for questions and answers. So NOVA 2020 Visions will be on April 13th. And then on April 27th, we are also hosting Flash Forward that will have a breakout session that will discuss supported employment options, competitive employment options, and post-secondary education options, which will also cover college, for our families on April 27th. We have Flash Forward coming up. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. We hope that you had a wonderful experience, and if you are interested in hearing more about career and transition services, you can follow us on social media. And if you have a few unanswered questions, it's still not too late to type your questions in chat or raise your hand and have a private conversation with one of our transition experts. We also encourage you to reach out to the employment and transition representative at your student's high school or the student's neighborhood feeder high school. Later this week, we will follow up and send you an email with this presentation slide, a recording of today's presentation, the details in chat, Career and Transition Services contact information, so you'll know who the employment and transition representative is at each school, a list of Career and Transition Service events that I mentioned on the previous slides. And then we're also going to send you an evaluation. And we ask you to please take a few moments to complete the electronic evaluation. your feedback is important, and it will help us make our workshops more useful in the future. So truly your opinion counts, so please complete the electronic evaluation sent to you. All right, and Jackie, before I finally close out the last slide, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to address?
Yes, I just wanted to jump in. I apologize. My whole computer froze, so I wasn't able to speak up. But I just kind of wanted to go back to. Do you mind if I go back to just 2 questions and just give a response really quickly?
No, not at all. We don't mind. Thank you
Right.
very much for your time.
Just something I
you.
wanted to jump in with was about the ongoing, how would the middle school and the high school share notes? One thing I just wanted to mention is that middle school and high school teams collaborate before, during, and after the IEP meeting. And beginning in the spring part of the year, students who are transitioning to 9th grade from 8th grade will have a transition meeting. And during that time period, that is an opportunity for the middle school and high school and the parent to kind of have everybody together. Please reach out to your department chairs, just if you would like to know who the high school representative is going to be. And then I also wanted to mention that, that while we don't propose specific classes, we always talk about services and determining if those services will take place in the general education or the special education setting. And then just the last question I wanted to share was regarding, I think there was a question about an advocate. And just to kind of piggyback on that, you know, every family has the ability to bring an advocate or bring a private provider to the school. You know you will not be treated any differently. It's definitely your right as the parent to bring anyone you'd like to the IEP. But I would also recommend reaching out if you have any concerns, reaching out to your PSL. People in my position, there's one of us at every single school, and we can be a resource to both parents, to schools, and we can help support any IEP or any special education meeting. If you don't know who your PSL is, you can go and you can just Google PSL FCPS, and you can find who your support is. We also have the Ombudsman's office, which is an office that you can call with questions and concerns. Thank you, everybody, and I apologize for the computer issues.
No, Jackie, thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for your time and your follow-up on the questions that we missed. Your dedication to us and the students in the community is truly appreciated. Thank you for revisiting those questions again. For the rest of you, I just want to say, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected, and remember that your students' active participation in the IEP and transition process is the best predictor for future success. So encourage your student to participate and be an active participant. Thank you for your interest and for attending today's session. Have a wonderful day, and be on the lookout for an email from Miss Maggie Contreras. Thank you.